everyone, I'm Jennifer Blevins-Smith with Integral Clinic Solutions in Oregon, and you're watching my channel, Navigating the Business of Medicine. Today we're going to review and talk about some of the essential reports I feel gives you a very good insight to the health of your business and the way that things are going for you in terms of your financial health of the business. I talked about doing this video in my revenue cycle management overview, so please check out that video before you watch this because I think it will help put everything in perspective. There are different increments in which you should run reports to check the health of the finances in your business. A lot of times, if you have a robust EHR or EMR system, you should be able to run most of these. They're pretty basic. You can make them even more specific than what I'm going to talk about and get down to a provider level or even a location level if you have multiple locations and you want to see the exact health of each location and each provider in each location. But this is just going to be 101 and things that you should be looking at and monitoring regularly in your business. Daily, you should be running a report on how many claims were submitted the day before. This is really good for checks and balances to make sure your claim submission process is efficient, that your billing team or RCM management company that is in charge of your billing is submitting on your behalf as often as they are saying. And also it gives you kind of a good idea of the billed charges that are out there if you run a report that shows how many claims were submitted for the total amount billed. Of course, you're not going to get all that money back because your fee schedule rounds up and anticipates the contracted write-offs that you have to take from payers, but it just gives you a good idea of how much was billed out. It's also good if you are monitoring other providers or wanting to see the status of other providers to look and see how much they're doing on a regular basis, and also to make sure that they're signing off their charts in time in order to submit. Timely filing is a big deal, and every payer has a different timely filing criteria. So your contracts with the payers will tell you that, but it is always best practice to at least at the minimum make sure that claims are submitted within a week that a patient is seen or a week within the date of service. I'm kind of a stickler and kind of strict, and honestly I would prefer 48 to 72 hours, but everyone is different and has different reasons why that won't work, and so whatever works best for your practice and your providers. Weekly reports. Weekly reports will give you a little bit more information. You should still run the report on the total amount of claims that were submitted as well as what is the total billed amount, but you also want to look at what was the total AR or accounts receivable of money that you received that week. It's nice to see what's coming and going and to kind of get a pulse, especially if you just open, on how fast payers are actually paying you. You also want to see what the outstanding claims amount is, the total, and you could go into the aging buckets, which we'll talk about here in a second. But, you know, on a weekly basis, just kind of having a brief overview of this I think is safe, as long as monthly you're doing what you need to be doing in a more deeper dive. The other thing that I think is helpful, especially if you have other providers working with you, is to look at the number of visits that were billed out in a week and the number of patients that were seen. You could even break it down to see what different patient types or visit types that were seen, how many new patients that you saw, how many new patients with certain insurances you saw. I mean, you can break it down to micro levels, and depending on your situation, where you're at, what kind of specialty you are, and what means the most to you in regards to new patients or provider performance, that's how you can run those reports. Another huge thing to run weekly are denial reports, and not just denials by CPT, like which ones are getting denied, but seeing which ones are being denied by which payers, and also the reason codes. This is so important to be able to catch things really quick in case there tends to be a trend happening in your specialty. For example, I can speak about allergy again. We started seeing a lot of denials for a certain code and we couldn't figure out why. And then another payer started doing it and another payer started doing it. And what happened is they changed the benefits essentially for that CPT code on the patient's plans and didn't really make it very widely known that it was being changed. Sneaky, but we were able to catch that in time, actually in multiple situations and different reasons. By checking these so often, we are able to nip it in the bud and make workflow changes and implement different criteria and expectations on staff for checking patient benefits and eligibility when it came to patient appointments. And then if anything needed to be made patient responsibility, we were able to catch that, and it just worked really well. In order to catch these kinds of things, a lot of times you'll probably need to work with your office manager or whoever is in charge of your clinical operations, because they're going to have a pretty good idea of what the insurances are talking about and how to work around this or have a solution. While I'm talking about this, before I go on to the monthly reports that should be ran, I want to stress the importance of having someone who has insight to your bank account as well as the billing system to be able to reconcile what the insurances state they are paying for in your electronic remittance advices or ones that come in the mail in those little offs that the secondary payers will send paper, or certain payers that are small will still send paper instead of electronic, and what is being deposited into your account. Sometimes there can be a delay. You'll receive an electronic remittance advice from an insurance company and they won't do the EFT for a week or two, but it's really important that there is some reconciliation going on a regular basis, because unfortunately things can happen, and I've known for insurances to say they have paid for something and we end up finding out they never did, and then you can go and let them know that, and they can do some investigation on their end and confirm that so that you can get paid. Staying on top of it is very important, because the sooner you catch it, the sooner you will get the money, and you see how this can go. Okay. Moving on to our monthly reports. So it's important to do the other reports that I've talked about on a monthly level, seeing your total claims that have been submitted, how much it's all been worth submitted, the amount submitted, number of patients, number of visits, you can break those down. But looking at your aging buckets, and what I mean by this is how much money is outstanding from your total payers, and also the total amount outstanding owed to you from patients. So usually you can run a report that we call the 30, 60, 90 aging report. That means from 0 to 30 days, how much is outstanding that still is owed to you. 31 to 60, and 61 to 90. And then you can get further from there, but you really want to keep all your outstanding balances within 0 to 90 days. The longer an unpaid balance goes, especially from a patient, the less likely you're going to get paid. It is very important that your billing service is staying on top of these buckets and working old claims and checking in with the payers to make sure that they're processing them and find out if there's an issue and what they can do to help resolve it so you can get paid. Now, when you run these reports, it should be aging based on the date of service, not the last submission of a claim. Let's say, for instance, you submitted a claim, they sent it back and said that they needed more information, so then you resubmitted it, and that date would go from the resubmission. That kind of gives false information because you really want to see the aging from the date of service. Remember, the date of service is the key when you're running a lot or most of these reports. So you want the dates of service 0 to 30, 31 to 60, 61 to 90. The bulk of your outstanding AR should be in the 0 to 30. And then the next drop down would be your 60 to 90, and then 90 plus should have your most minimal amount, especially when it comes to over 90 should not hardly be any. And yes, it happens. There's going to be some that are out there, and there's different things that can affect this, whether it's an appeal or there are some technical issues, or who knows. Usually after the first of the year, payers are a little backlogged from wrapping up everything from the previous year, and then you go into deductible season, so sometimes there's a delay there. But for the most part, that is the standard rule. Your 0 to 30 should have your highest AR outstanding balance, then your 60 to 90, and then your 90 plus is the least. Another important monthly report to run is the total amount of money that you brought in for the month, your total AR, and break it down by your payers and by your patients. So you get a good feel if patients are actually paying their balances, if your staff is collecting patient balances, whether it's upfront or over the phone, if people are paying online, if there's so many things that you can read into and dive deeper into these, but these are the fundamental, just foundation basic reports to run, and then you can go a little bit deeper if you have more questions and run them on a more micro level. But I'm just providing you with the very basic ones that you should definitely be looking at. So that covers our monthly reports. Now quarterly, so every 3 months, you should be running, again, the reports I've mentioned. The aging buckets I would definitely be focusing on, because you should be able to compare what you've been seeing monthly to what you see quarterly. And also hopefully you're seeing trends that things are getting paid and your buckets are staying either consistent or they're dropping a little bit with the balances. You also want to run a CPT code reimbursement by payer, by provider. So what I mean by that is run a report that shows all the CPT codes that you have billed out and what the allowable or the reimbursed amount has been from each payer that you've billed out. That way you can kind of see where each payer is in respect to the other when reimbursing for the same code. This is really good for renegotiating your reimbursement and contracts with payers. And it also kind of gives you an idea of how many patients and visits you're seeing in a certain time frame, and what kind of visits can give you an idea of what the reimbursement is if you know the percentage of your patient population's insurances. And you can kind of start trying to figure out, if you saw so many patients with a certain insurance for a certain CPT code, about how much you can expect to bring in. And this is going to take some time. It's not going to happen probably within the first year, maybe not even the second year, depending on how fast your practice grows. But eventually you should be able to look at things and be like, okay, in order for me to pay my overheads on a certain day, we need to see this many patients with these many codes with this insurance, and then we'll be doing okay. Or if we see this many patients with this insurance that doesn't reimburse so well, then we'll have to do a little bit better the next day. And it's used as a guide. It's not to quote unquote discriminate or try to micromanage your scheduling or anything like that. It's just to really help you get an idea and gauge, and also, the most importantly, the renegotiations with the insurance companies. The other thing that is really important is if you have other providers, to look at and make sure that they're reimbursed by CPT code the same as everybody else. So if you're billing under a group contract, your providers, or at least I should say your doctors, should be reimbursed the same from every payer. So if Blue Cross pays you $100 for a code, then all the doctors in your clinic should be paid $100 for that code. Now remember, mid-levels, PAs and nurse practitioners, they get reimbursed about 85% of what you're being reimbursed for doctors. And that's just across the board pretty standard. There's a lot of lobbying going on, especially for nurse practitioners in states such as Oregon that can practice without having a supervising physician and practice independently, that they should be reimbursed the same as a DO or an MD. Same with naturopaths. Naturopathic doctors in a lot of states do not get reimbursed the same as MDs and DOs, and that's being lobbied in a lot of states as well. We'll see what happens in the years to come, but right now MDs and DOs are reimbursed the highest when it comes to the type of provider, and then everyone else is less than that. And you'll want to check out your payer contracts to really get an idea of where they put each reimbursed provider under your contract. The last thing is the annual report. The annual report is really going to help you do a retro analysis of how the whole year was, and you're going to run all of the reports that I've mentioned here and really try to get a grasp of what kind of patient population you have, how you're scheduling, how your staff is doing, how your other providers are doing, how collections is going, how your patients pay, and how payers are paying you. Now, this is a lot of information, and hopefully you have a good CPA that can help you and has experience with medical providers and practices that can help with best practices and how to change some workflows or expectations. So it's definitely worth finding someone that has that background and expertise to help guide you, especially as a new owner of a medical practice. Having a good bookkeeper throughout the year to help you with all of this, and your manager or who else you have in charge of monitoring and running these reports and working with you side by side and pointing out any weird outliers or trends. You know, you want a tight, close-knit team that has a strong background and understands what they're looking at, or at least willing to ask questions and dive deeper to figure out the answers to the questions. I hope this has been helpful. I'm not trying to throw a bunch at you. I am going to put together a sheet for you listing these reports by time period so that you can use it as a reference. I will put the link in the description, or if you want to leave a comment with your email address, I can email it to you. I am excited to help providers because this is huge, and it does take time out of your day, and it is part of being a business owner and not just a provider, but it could be a huge key to your success. And catching any kind of issues when it comes to money flow is super important when you're trying to pay your overheads and your staff and make a little money for yourself. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Hit the thumbs up if you found this helpful, and subscribe to my channel. If you want to know when I release new videos, which I try to do on Tuesdays and Thursdays, hit the bell icon and you will be notified. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great day.